She walked into a SEAL compound, carrying a laptop and a toolbox. They laughed. Not behind her back, openly. Loud enough for her to hear. She was 27 years old. 5'4", ponytail, coffee-stained sleeves. The kind of woman who fixed their Wi-Fi and got forgotten by lunch. Nobody looked twice. Nobody noticed the rifle case tucked beneath a canvas tarp in the bed of her truck. Nobody recognized the name etched into the stock, a name that still made senior operators go quiet when it came up in conversation. They were about to find out. If this is your first time here, subscribe. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Hit the like button and stay until the end. Because what happens next, nobody saw it coming. The gate guard barely glanced at her ID. Emma Harper had been badging through the eastern entrance of Redstone Naval Warfare Facility for 11 months, and in 11 months, not a single gate sentry had looked at her face long enough to remember it. They saw the contractor badge. They saw the IT services lanyard. They waved her through. She preferred it that way. Her truck was a 2009 Tacoma with a cracked passenger mirror and a check engine light that had been on since March. She drove it past the motor pool, past the Armory Annex, past the long concrete building where Bravo Troop kept their vehicles staged for rapid deployment. 2 operators were doing PT in the parking lot chest deep in push-ups, cadence counting under their breath. One of them looked up as her truck rolled past, looked back down, didn't miss a rep. Emma parked in Lot C, which was where all the contractors parked, 3 rows back from the buildings that mattered. She killed the engine, sat for a moment in the quiet, then reached behind the seat and pulled out her laptop bag and the heavy canvas toolbox she carried everywhere. Toolbox made a dense, solid sound when she set it on the asphalt. Tools people assumed, diagnostic equipment, the things a woman with an IT badge would naturally carry. She walked to the admin building, badged through the security door, and started her morning. The network rack room on the east wing of the operations building was the kind of space nobody visited voluntarily. It was cold, kept at 64 degrees for the equipment, and it smelled like old circuit boards and industrial cleaner. Cable bundles ran ceiling to floor in organized loops. Server towers hummed in their racks. The room made a constant low-frequency sound that you stopped noticing after the first hour and started noticing again on the drive home. Emma liked it. She could work in here for 8 hours without a single interruption. That was worth something. She'd been troubleshooting a routing issue on the Tier 2 operations network. For the past 3 days, it's something intermittent, the kind of problem that you looked directly at it and reappeared the moment you turned your back. She had packet captures running on 2 different tap points and a terminal window open on her laptop with a live trace that had been running since 400. She was studying it when the door opened. She didn't look up. Heavy footsteps. Multiple sets. The particular cadence of men who walked like they owned a room before they entered it. Harper. Chief Petty Officer Darnell Briggs. One of the senior enlisted advisors attached to Bravo Troop. He was 41 years old and built like a piece of equipment that had been field repaired too many times but still functioned. He had a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw, and he didn't care who noticed it. Chief. She kept her eyes on the trace. You fixed the comms issue in the ready room yet? Tomorrow morning. I'm running a replacement switch overnight. Admiral Morrison needs that room functional by 700. It'll be functional by 600. She looked up briefly. The switch arrives at 200. I'll be here. Briggs regarded her for a moment with a particular expression. Senior enlisted, used on junior people who gave them straight answers, without flinching, not quite respect, not quite suspicion. Something in between. You're pulling an all-nighter over a network switch. Someone has to. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and walked out. 2 operators who'd come in with him hadn't said a word. She'd heard one of them mutter something after the door closed, but the HVAC drowned out the words. and she didn't care enough to reconstruct them. She ate lunch alone on a concrete barrier near the east parking lot. This was not pathetic. This was strategic. Concrete barrier gave her a clear sightline to the rifle range on the facility's northern edge, a half-mile strip of packed dirt and target frames that the SEAL teams used for weapons sustainment 3 mornings a week. From where she sat, with a good pair of eyes and the right angle of afternoon light, she could watch the shooters on the 300-yard line without appearing to look at anything in particular. She watched. She ate her sandwich, and she watched and she cataloged. The man with the inconsistent trigger pull who compensated by rolling his shoulder on the shot break. The left-handed shooter who kept chasing his groups low right because he was anticipating recoil. Tall one, Lieutenant Cole, she'd learned his name from a base directory 3 weeks ago, who was legitimately good. Clean mount, controlled breathing. His natural point of aim was solid, and he knew it. He was also, she had noticed, the kind of man who was good at things and had been told so often enough that he'd confused being good with being the best. There was a difference. She'd spent 20 years learning what that difference looked like. The announcement went up on the base bulletin boards on a Tuesday. Operation Iron Horizon, long-range precision shooting evaluation, open to all assigned and attached personnel, including support contractors. Duration, 3 days. Ranges, 600, 900, and 1,000 yards. Purpose, identification of exceptional precision, shooting talent for potential program placement. Emma read it once, folded the paper in quarters, put it in her jacket pocket. She didn't sign up that day. She drove home, showered, ate dinner, sat at the table with a cup of coffee, going cold, and thought about it for a long time. Her grandfather's voice came to her in moments like this, not like a ghost, not like some mystical thing. More like muscle memory, the way a trained movement lives in the body without being summoned. You'll know when it's time, Emma. The problem is, you'll want to talk yourself out of it. Picked up her phone, opened the sign-up portal, entered her name, her badge number, her contractor classification. She hit submit before she could change her mind. Closed the laptop. Finished the cold coffee. The response was immediate, and it came from everywhere at once. She heard it the next morning in the hallway, outside the server room. Did you see the sign-up list? The IT girl? Seriously? Somebody needs to explain to her what the word evaluation means. Maybe she thinks it's a typing competition. She walked past them with her toolbox and her laptop bag. Kept her face neutral. Kept her pace the same. One of them she didn't look to see, who said something that got the other one to laugh, but the laughter trailed away behind her as she pushed through the stairwell door and it swung shut. That was fine. She'd been training since she was 7 years old. She could absorb a hallway. Lieutenant Mason Cole found her 3 days before the competition started. She was in the motor pool, crouched next to an equipment trailer, running a cable diagnostic on a communications unit that had been throwing errors during the last training exercise. Cole walked up and stood about 3 feet behind her, not saying anything at first, which was a technique. Make someone uncomfortable with your presence before you open your mouth. Emma didn't turn around. Can I help you, Lieutenant? A beat of silence. He stepped forward, came around to her left side so she'd have to look at him if she looked up at all. I saw your name on the Iron Horizon list. Good eyes. Harper. He said her name like it was a question. What's your shooting background? She set down the diagnostic reader and looked up at him. Mason Cole was 34, probably. He had the kind of face that looked permanently confident, not arrogant exactly, just accustomed. Like a man who had learned early that things generally went his way and had organized his life around that expectation. Recreational, she said. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone says something you were expecting to hear. Look, I'm not trying to be an ass about this, but Iron Horizon isn't a fun range day. The guys competing have logged thousands of rounds downrange. Some of them have combat deployments, real conditions. You're going to be shooting beside people who do this professionally. Emma looked at him for a moment. I know what it is, Lieutenant. I'm just saying. There's no shame in withdrawing. The competition's going to be intense, and it's not. Is there a rule against contractors competing? He paused. No. Then I'm competing. She picked up the diagnostic reader and turned back to the equipment panel. Was there something else? Another pause. Longer this time. Just wanted to give you a heads up, he said finally. Appreciated. She heard him walk away. She kept her face angled down toward the panel until his footsteps were gone. Then she exhaled. She drove north that evening, 90 minutes on state roads that climbed into scrub oak and high desert. She turned off the paved road onto a dirt track that her truck knew by itself, at this point, 3 miles of washboard surface that led to a flat property surrounded by fencing and old juniper trees. Cabin was her grandfather's, had been since 1978. Now it was hers, and she came here when she needed to remember what she was. Structure itself was nothing to look at: weathered wood siding, a covered porch, a satellite dish bolted to the roof at an angle that suggested it had been adjusted many times. Inside it smelled like woods smoke and linseed oil and something older underneath that she'd never been able to identify, but that she associated entirely and completely with her grandfather. She went straight to the back hallway, unlocked the door to what looked, from the outside, like a utility closet. Inside was a staircase. The basement was long and low-ceilinged. Concrete floor, work lights on ceiling mounts. One wall was covered floor to ceiling in ballistic reference, data range cards, wind charts, atmospheric tables going back years. The other wall held the equipment: cleaning kits, spotting scopes, reloading tools, logbooks filled in her grandfather's tight, deliberate handwriting. And in the center of the back wall, on a simple wooden rack, was the rifle. The M24 was a Remington 700 action, built to Army sniper specifications, not the newer variants, not the upgraded platform, the original. This one had been built in the mid-'80s, had a loopholed Mark IV scope that her grandfather had fitted himself, and a stock that had been rebedded twice to accommodate the way the rifle breathed through temperature changes. She had fired 47,000 rounds through it over the course of 20 years. She knew its personality better than she knew most people. She took it off the rack, carried it to the bench, and went through the disassembly sequence from memory. Every piece went onto the clean mat in a specific order. She examined each surface under the lamplight, wiped away any trace of moisture with treated patches, inspected the bore with a bore light, checked the action for any debris or fouling from the last range session. While she worked, she talked to him. Not out loud, she wasn't that far gone. But in the way you have conversations with people who are gone, in the part of your mind where you still hear their voice clearly. Competition's in 3 days, Grandpa. She ran a patch through the bore. They think it's funny that I signed up. She checked the action spring tension. I almost didn't. I almost talked myself out of it again. She reassembled the rifle, seated the scope rings, checked torque on the action screws. You always said the rifle doesn't care what people think of you. So, just whether your fundamentals are sound. She chambered an empty action, pressed the trigger, listened to the clean snap of the firing pin. Fundamentals are sound, Grandpa. She held the rifle for a moment in the quiet basement. I think it's time. She left the cabin at 500 the next morning and drove to a private property 12 miles east that belonged to an old friend of her grandfather, a retired Navy Master Chief named Harlan Voss, who had known Ghost Harper for 4 decades and who asked. Emma, 0 questions about why she showed up in the dark with her rifle and arranging kit. He just opened the gate and let her through. The property had a natural backstop, a long ridge of compacted earth at the end of a cleared corridor through the scrub. Harlan had put up steel targets at measured intervals years ago. They were rust-colored and weathered, but they rang true. Emma set up at the 900-yard line. She spent 4 hours there, alone in the cold morning air, running through wind holds, practicing positional adjustments, running her follow-through sequences until they happened without thought. The barked in the desert quiet. Steel rang distantly. She marked each hit in her log, noted the conditions, wind speed, and direction from the kestrel on her wrist, temperature, density, altitude. When she was done, she packed up, drove back to Harlan's gate, and thanked him. "You ready?" he asked. He was leaning on the gate post with a cup of coffee, watching her load the rifle case into the truck. "I don't know," she said honestly. He nodded. Ghost always said that. Said if you thought you were ready, you weren't paying attention. She thought about that on the drive back. The first morning of Iron Horizon was gray and cold, with a wind that came across the valley in inconsistent gusts, the kind of condition that experienced shooters hated, because it didn't give you anything reliable to work with. You could read a steady crosswind. You could calculate a steady headwind. Variable, shifting, gusting, that required something beyond calculation. Her grandfather had called it listening to the air. There were 16 competitors. 12 were from SEAL Teams 4, from Bravo Troop, 3 from an attached DVGU element that had been at the facility for a training integration, 2 from a Marine MARSOC unit visiting for a joint exercise, and the rest scattered across various special operations attachments. One was an Army Special Forces sergeant named Reyes, who had placed in the top 5 at a national-level precision shooting competition the previous year. People mentioned his name the way they mentioned a number, like it was a fact that had already been established. And then there was Emma Harper. She came through the gate with her rifle case and her spotting kit, wearing her work jacket over a base layer because she hadn't bought range-specific cold weather gear and didn't intend to start now. She found her assigned firing point, set up her gear in the sequence she drilled for years, and organized her kit with a methodical quiet that nobody noticed because nobody was paying attention to what she was doing. They were watching Reyes set up on the adjacent point, watching Cole take his position 3 spots down, talking, trading assessments, running through the odds. The range officer walked the line. He was a weathered master sergeant professionally. He was a weathered master sergeant named Cutler, who had the expression of a man who had refereed enough of these things to have stopped being impressed by anything. Checked equipment, verified ammunition compliance, confirmed each competitor's registration. He reached Emma's position and stopped. He looked at the rifle. Not a casual glance, a full stop. His eyes went from the stock to the scope, to the action, to the stock again. "That's an M24, he said. "Yes, Master Sergeant. Original configuration. Pre-A2. "Yes." Cutler crouched down, looked at the rifle without touching it. He read the serial number from the receiver, stood back up. "Where did you get this rifle, Harper?" "It was my grandfather's." "Name?" "Harper. William Harper, Chief Petty Officer. SEAL Team 3. He went by Ghost." Cutler said it before she finished. The word came out quietly, like something being handled carefully. He looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes moved from her face to the rifle and back. "You're Ghost Harper's granddaughter." "Yes, Master Sergeant." Cutler was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened, made a mark on his clipboard, and moved to the next position without saying another word. Conversation had not been quiet. On a range line, sound carries. Emma heard the ripple move down the firing points before the first relay was even called. Saw it in the way heads turned. Saw Mason Cole 3 spots down, go very still for a moment. She positioned herself behind the rifle, pulled her cheek down to the stock, and looked through the scope at the target frame. 600 yards downrange. Target was a steel plate, 10 inches square, in a gusting crosswind with a variable shift pattern. Fundamentals are sound. The range officer called the command. "Relay 1 shooters ready." Emma's breathing slowed. Her left hand cupped the forend. Her right settled on the grip. Her cheek welded to the comb of the stock with the light pressure of long habit. She found the target. She waited for a lull in the gusting, not a dead calm. There was no dead calm today, but a relative lull, the space between gusts where the mirage settled for half of a second. She found it. She pressed the trigger. The rifle fired with the controlled authority of a weapon that had been built to do exactly this. Downrange, the steel rang. She cycled the bolt, reacquired, waited for the next lull. Fire complete cease. Fire safe your weapons. The relay was done. Around her, people were talking, comparing notes, analyzing their performance, arguing about win calls. The usual post-relay noise. Emma cleared the chamber, safed the rifle, and sat back in her position. She did not look at the scoreboard. She looked at the sky, reading the wind flags at 300 and 600 yards the way her grandfather had her, the angle of the nylon, the behavior of the fabric, the lag time between movements. The wind changes differently at altitude. Watch the lower flags first, then the upper. Cutler walked the line again, recording scores. When he got to Emma's position, he paused. He wrote something on his clipboard. He moved on without speaking. 2 positions down, someone said, "What did she shoot?" And Cutler's voice came back, flat and professional. "Harper, 50. Perfect score." The line went quiet. Not the polite quiet of mild surprise, the actual quiet of people recalibrating. Emma remained in her position, eyes on the wind flags, watching the gusts come through the valley in diagonal lines across the sage. 3 spots down, she heard Mason Coles say nothing at all. That was when she knew she had their attention. The problem was she had also just caught the attention of someone she hadn't planned on. A man standing behind the observation line in civilian clothes, holding a tablet, taking notes in a way that had nothing to do with keeping score. She'd noticed him at 800 when she'd driven through the gate. Gray jacket, no rank insignia, a face that gave away nothing. She'd assumed visitor, observer, staff. But he hadn't moved from that position in 4 hours. And he wasn't watching the top competitors. He was watching her. She filed that detail away the way her grandfather had taught her to file anything she couldn't immediately explain. Don't react to what you don't understand yet. Observe. Catalog. Wait. She broke down her position, packed her kit with the same methodical sequence, and walked off the line without making eye contact with anyone. The debrief area was a covered pavilion 50 yards behind the firing line, folding tables, coffee urns that had been sitting since 600, a whiteboard someone had propped against a support post. Cutler stood at the front running through relay scores with the flat efficiency of a man who considered this part of his job a necessary inconvenience. Emma sat at the end of a table with her coffee and her logbook open, transcribing her round count and condition notes from the morning session. Around her, the conversation had the particular quality of people trying to process something without admitting they were processing it. Reyes, the Special Forces sergeant, was sitting 2 tables over with a group of SEAL operators. He was a compact, quiet man, maybe 30, with close-cut hair and hands that rested completely still on the table surface. He had shot a 48 out of 50 on the morning relay. He was good. Emma had watched his position work between her own shots, and she'd noted his breathing sequence, his trigger prep, the way he managed the inconsistent wind. He was genuinely skilled. He was also, she now understood, watching her back. Not in a hostile way, in the way a serious competitor identifies a threat and starts gathering data. She respected that. Harper, she looked up. Cole was standing across the table from her. He had a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, which told her the coffee was an excuse. She waited. "That was a good string this morning," he said. "Thank you. Conditions were bad. They were manageable." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She registered the shift. This was different from the motor pool conversation. That had been him delivering a verdict. This was something else. "Ghost Harper," he said. I've heard that name since I was in Bud SH. He's in the curriculum. Did you know that? He mentioned it once. She looked back at her logbook. He thought it was embarrassing. He set a record in 1,987 that stood for 11 years. Confirmed shot at 1,900 meters. Bolt gun, iron support, no wind meter. Called the shot himself. I know. Did he teach you? She wrote a number in her logbook. Wind reading from the 930 relay. Yes. Since when? Since I was 7. Cole was quiet for a moment. Finished transcribing the row, moved to the next line. Why the contractor cover? He asked. She looked up at that. The question was sharper than she'd expected from him. It's not cover. I'm actually an IT contractor. She held his gaze. I also shoot. Both things can be true. You've been on this base for almost a year. 11 months. And nobody knew. Nobody asked. He sat with that. Around them, the debrief was winding down, people peeling off to grab food or check their equipment before the afternoon session. Pavilion thinned out. The second relay this afternoon is 900 yards, he said. Wind's going to pick up after 1,300. It's going to be bad. I know. You read the forecast? I read the flags. She closed the logbook. The wind direction shifts about 14 degrees counterclockwise after midday in this valley. Been doing that since I started eating lunch outside 4 months ago. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, picked up his untouched coffee. Good luck this afternoon, Harper. You too, Lieutenant. He walked away. She watched him go, then looked back down at her logbook and stared at the last entry without reading it. That conversation had gone differently than she'd expected. That was worth noting. The afternoon relay was everything the forecast had suggested, and then worse. The wind picked up at 1,247. She clocked it on her Kestrel, and by the time the 900-yard line was hot, it was running 12 to 16 knots with irregular gusts that pushed past 20. The flags at the mid-range poles were snapping hard, cycling through a 40-degree arc unpredictably. 2 shooters on the first relay missed the target entirely on their second and third shots. One of the DG-RU operators, a man who had reportedly competed at Camp Perry, put his 4th round 6 inches left of the plate and spent a visible moment collecting himself before his 5th shot. Emma watched all of this from the staging area. She was on the second relay. She had spent the last hour doing nothing except watching the wind. Not her phone, not her logbook, the wind, the flags, the mirage shimmer above the range surface. The way the vegetation at the ridgeline responded, a half-second before the lower flags moved. Her grandfather had spent 6 months teaching her to read terrain wind before he ever let her shoot past 600 yards. The bullet travels through air that has already moved by the time it gets there. You're not correcting for the wind that exists. You're correcting for the wind that will exist. She took her position on the line. The steel plate at 900 yards was barely visible, a gray rectangle in the afternoon haze. The wind hammered across the range in pulses. Cutler called the relay. She settled in. The first thing she did was stop thinking about the wind as a problem. Her grandfather had given her a concept years ago that she'd resisted at first because it sounded like something from a self-help book, and she had zero patience for self-help books. But he hadn't phrased it that way. He'd phrased it technically, the way he phrased everything. A variable wind isn't chaos. It's a pattern you haven't identified yet. Find the pattern. Shoot the pattern. She found it in the first 90 seconds of watching. The gusts were coming in from the northwest on a roughly 8-second cycle, peaking at the 18 to 20 knot range for about 2 seconds, then dropping back to a base flow of 11. Within the base flow, there was a 4-second window where the direction stabilized. 4 seconds was enough. She waited. As gust peaked. Flags snapped left. She breathed. The gust dropped. Base flow settled. Direction held. She pressed the trigger. Steel rang at 900. She cycled. Waited. Found the next window. 5 shots. 5 hits. When Cutler announced the score, the range went quiet in a way that felt different from the morning. The morning quiet had been surprise, this something closer to adjustment, the particular silence of people updating their model of what was possible. Reyes, 2 positions down, had shot a 48 again. 2 misses in the worst of the gut instinct. He was good enough to be frustrated by that, and she could see it in the set of his jaw when he cleared his weapon. She packed her kit. The man in the gray jacket was still at the observation line, still watching her. That evening she sat in her truck in the Lot C parking area and ate a gas station sandwich and thought about the next day. The final stage was moving targets at 1,000 yards. She had practiced it. She knew the physics. Bullet flight time at 1,000 yards in standard conditions was approximately 1.4 seconds for her load, but conditions tomorrow would not be standard. She'd have to calculate target speed, lead distance, wind correction, and environmental factors simultaneously, and she'd have to do it in real time with no second chances. The moving target stage was where competitions like this separated the trained from the exceptional. She had done it in training at Harlan's property with a mechanical target mover that Harlan had built from an old fence motor. She had done it in conditions and in calm. She had done it until it stopped feeling like a puzzle and started feeling like a conversation. But training and competition were different animals. Training had no audience, no history, no weight. She rolled down the window. The desert night was coming in cold and clear. Stars were visible at the edges of the sky where the base lighting didn't reach. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number," she answered. "Harper," a voice she didn't recognize. Male, even, the kind of voice that had learned not to carry information it didn't intend to. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching you shoot for 2 days." A pause. "You have a decision to make tomorrow. How you perform on the final stage determines some things." She waited. "Some significant things," the voice continued. "I want you to understand that before you step on that line. I perform the same way regardless of what's at stake," she said. "My grandfather taught me that too." A longer pause. Ghost Harper was one of the finest shooters this country ever produced. He understood that talent creates obligation. The voice shifted slightly. "Think about what that means. Tomorrow." The call ended. She sat with the phone in her hand, looked out at the desert dark. Whatever that was, threat, recruitment pitch, psychological game, it had one effect she doubted the caller intended. It made her angry, not the hot, reactive kind, the cold kind that settled into the body and became fuel. Finished the sandwich, started the truck, and drove home. Third morning arrived with high clouds and a wind from the south that was steadier than the previous 2 days, not calm, but at least consistent. Reading it would be straightforward. The variables would come from the target movement itself. The moving target system was a mechanical rail that ran on a horizontal track across the downrange face of a berm, a steel plate on a motorized carriage that moved at variable speeds between 4 and 8 miles per hour. Direction changes randomized, stopping points unknown. The shooter got 4 shots per string. The carriage direction could change mid-string. 4 shots. Unlimited time, but time cost you, because the target didn't stop. Emma had slept 5 hours. She'd been up at 430, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with her logbook, and run through the ballistic math for every variable she could anticipate. She drove to the facility in the dark. She badged through the gate. The guard looked at her badge, looked at her face. He recognized her. That was new. The observation area for the final stage was packed. Word had spread through the facility in the way word always spread through small military installations, fast and thorough, and slightly distorted by the time it completed one loop. The story going around, as best as Emma could reconstruct it from fragments she'd overheard, was approximately true, but had acquired a cinematic quality it didn't quite deserve. She'd heard someone in the equipment bay say she'd shot a perfect score at 1,200 yards in a hurricane. Close enough. Admiral James Morrison was in the observation tower. She noticed him when she was setting up her position, a tall man in his late 50s with the bearing of someone accustomed to elevated places. He was standing at the railing with his hands behind his back, watching the range with the focused attention of a man who had not come here to watch a routine event. Beside him was the man in the gray jacket. They were talking. She noted that, filed it, focused on her position. The range officer ran through the stage brief, 4 shots per string, 2 strings total. Moving target, variable speed, randomized direction changes. Shooters would be called in rank order from the previous day's combined score. Meant Emma was third. She watched the first 2 strings from the adjacent position. First shooter, one of the DVEVGRU operators, hit 2 out of 4 on his first string. Adjusted on his second, hit 3. 5 total. Solid. Second shooter, Reyes. She watched him carefully. He was very good. His lead calculation was accurate. His trigger timing was controlled. Tracked the target through the scope with the patience of a man who had done this in conditions where missing meant something other than a score. First string, 3 hits. One missed the carriage, had changed direction mid-string, and he'd been committed to his lead on the old vector. Second string, 4 hits. Perfect. 7 out of 8. Crowd reacted. Reyes came off the line, and she caught his eye for a moment. He gave her a single nod. No performance in it. Just one competitor acknowledging another. She nodded back. Then she moved to the line. The range officer positioned her. She settled in behind the rifle, ran through her pre-shot checklist. Verified 0. Checked the wind indicator on the near post. Noted the ambient temperature against her earlier reading. Carriage was at rest at the left edge of the track, 1,000 yards away. Shooter ready? Ready. Targets will move on my signal. 3, 2, 1 move. The carriage started. It moved right at what she estimated was 6 miles per hour. She picked it up in the scope, found the steel plate, began her lead calculation. At 1,000 yards with a 1.4 second flight time and a 6 miles per hour target speed, 8.5 feet of lead. She held off the left edge of her scope's field of view. The wind. She adjusted 2 minutes right for the southerly crosswind. She tracked. She found her window. She pressed the trigger. The rifle fired. 1.4 seconds. Steel rang. She cycled, tracked, recalculated. Carriage was still moving, right speed unchanged. Second shot. Steel rang. She was in a rhythm now. The target was a conversation, and she was answering it. Carriage changed direction. Left, at a slightly higher speed, maybe 7 miles per hour. The change happened between her second and third shots. She had half a second to register it, update her lead, hold the new vector. Some shooters would have rushed. Tried to get the shot off before they'd completed the recalculation. Emma breathed, waited 1 full second, updated the lead. Pressed. Steel rang. Fourth. Shot the carriage was still moving left, decelerating slightly near the track boundary. She read the deceleration in the target's movement through the scope, shaded her lead slightly back. Pressed. Steel rang. Cease fire. Safe your weapons. Cleared the action, safed the rifle, and sat back in her position. Could hear the crowd from where she was sitting. Not cheers exactly. Something more like the sound a room makes when everyone exhales at the same moment. She reloaded for the second string. The second string she shot clean. 4 for 4. The carriage threw a direction change. On the third shot, same as the first string, slightly different timing. She was ready for it. She had been ready for it since 430 that morning. 8 shots. 8 hits. Cutler's voice on the range radio was professionally flat. Harper, 8 for 8. The observation tower was very still. Admiral Morrison was no longer watching the range. He was watching her. The final scores were announced at 1,600 in the main briefing room. The room was not large enough for everyone who had decided to attend. People were standing in the back, lining the walls. Emma sat in the third row, with her logbook closed on her knee. Cutler read the results in reverse order, with the efficiency of a man who understood that ceremony was just delayed information. The names came and went. Reyes, second place, combined score that would have won most competitions she'd heard of. He received it with a contained satisfaction that she respected. First place. Cutler paused. Not for drama. He was not a dramatic man. Pause was because he was double-checking the number against his sheet. First place. Combined score perfect. Harper, Emma. IT contractor, support attachment. The room was quiet. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone started clapping. Not enthusiastic applause. Measured. Genuine. And it spread not like a crowd at a game, but like the kind of acknowledgement that travels through a room when people are processing something true. She stood, didn't say anything, gave a single nod, sat back down. She was packing up her gear near the parking lot when she heard footsteps behind her. Turned. The man in the gray jacket. Up close, he was older than she'd estimated. 60, maybe. He had the kind of face that had been deliberately schooled into neutrality over a very long time. He held out a business card. She took it. No name. No rank. Just a phone number and 2 words below it. Program glass door. The Admiral would like to speak with you, the man said. When you're ready. About what? The man looked at her for a moment. About what happens to someone with your skill set when the right people stop not noticing them. She looked at the card. Looked back up. I have equipment to pack. Of course, he said. Take your time. He walked away. She stood in the parking lot with the card in her hand and the desert wind moving cold across the flat ground. Her grandfather's rifle was in its case at her feet. The afternoon light was going copper and flat across the scrubland to the west. From somewhere inside the facility, from somewhere in her secret, she could hear voices operators running a debrief, the normal machinery of a military installation moving through its afternoon. She had been invisible in it for 11 months. She wasn't anymore. She looked at the card one more time, pocketed it, picked up the rifle case, then her phone buzzed. Not the unknown number from last night. Her work phone, the facility help desk system. A ticket had just been opened. Priority, critical location, Bravo Troop, secure communications room. She stared at the screen. The secure communications room, where she'd replaced the switch 3 weeks ago. The room that was supposed to be functioning perfectly. The room that was, according to the ticket, now showing a complete loss of network connectivity, with an active operations package running inside it. She was already moving. She was running before she'd consciously decided to run. The rifle case was back in her truck, locked in 40 seconds flat. She grabbed her laptop bag from the passenger seat, pulled out her access credentials and the facility network map she kept folded in the front pocket, habit from her first week when she'd gotten turned around twice in the operations wing and decided she'd never let that happen again. She moved across the parking lot at a pace that wasn't quite a jog, but covered ground faster than a walk. Badged through the east entrance, took the stairs instead of the elevator, because the elevator in this building was slow and old, and she didn't have the patience for it right now. Secure communications room was on the 2nd floor, east corridor, behind 2 badge-controlled doors. The first door accepted her IT contractor credentials without issue. The second door, the one that accessed the inner corridor of the operations section, was a different matter. She badged it. The reader flashed red. She tried again. Red. She stood there for 2 seconds, thinking. Her contractor clearance covered the network infrastructure in this corridor. She'd been through this door 16 times in the past 3 months. The access should have been there. She pulled out her phone and called the facility security desk. Security, Petty Officer Ramirez. This is Emma Harper, IT contractor, badge 774 Alpha. I have a critical network ticket for the Bravo Troop, secure comms room, and my corridor access is showing denied. Can you verify? A pause. Keyboard sounds. Harper, I'm showing your corridor access was suspended this afternoon. Suspended why? Another pause. Longer. I don't have a reason code on here. Just shows suspended 1,547 hours. 1,547. 23 minutes ago. 8 minutes after she'd been handed a business card by a man with no name and 2 words on it. Who suspended it? It shows administrative hold. No originating officer listed. She processed that. Can you issue a temporary override? I have an active critical ticket. Operations package is affected. I'd have to get a duty officer authorization for that. It could take 20 minutes. 20 minutes for a critical comms failure with an ops package running. 20 minutes was a long time for a lot of things. Get the duty officer, she said. I'll wait. She ended the call and stood in the corridor outside the locked door and thought about what had just happened. Her access pulled 23 minutes after being noticed by someone in the observation tower. Her access pulled by an administrative hold with no originating officer. Someone Sodson. Someone had gotten nervous. The question was whether they were nervous about her skill set or nervous about what she might find inside that room. The door opened from the inside. She stepped back. Chief Briggs came through it, and behind him, 2 operators she recognized from Bravo Troop Petty Officer, First Class Danny Kowalski, and a newer guy, whose name she hadn't learned yet, mid-20s, the kind of serious that came from wanting to prove something. Briggs looked at her standing in the corridor with her laptop bag. Harper, what are you doing up here? Critical ticket on the secure comms room. Network's down. We know. His expression was the particular closed-down look of a senior enlisted man who was handling multiple problems at once and had just discovered another one. We're handling it. How? One of the comms techs is... Which comms tech? Briggs looked at her. Petty Officer Garza. Garza doesn't have access to the Tier 2 routing equipment. Contractor managed infrastructure. He can look at it, but he can't touch the configuration without me. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Behind him, Kowalski had the expression of a man watching a conversation he wasn't sure how to intervene in. The ops package, Emma said. What's the status? That's not your concern, Harper. The network that ops package is running on is absolutely my concern. Chief, I installed that switch. I configured the routing tables. I know this system better than anyone on this base. Down, I need to be in that room. Your access is suspended. I know. Someone suspended it 20 minutes ago without a reason code. You want to tell me that's a coincidence? Briggs looked at her for a long moment. There was a sound from inside the corridor, the distant, unintelligible exchange of radio traffic. Someone calling for a status update, someone else answering in the clipped shorthand of people under pressure. Briggs made a decision. She could see it happen on his face, the slight shift in his jaw, the breath. You've got 15 minutes, he said. Kowalski stays with you. Fine. Briggs held the door. She walked through. Secure communications room was smaller than it looked on the facility map, maybe 15 feet by 20, lined with equipment racks on 3 walls and a central table that held 4 monitor stations. 2 of the monitors were dark. The other 2 were showing the slow, cycling error screens of network interfaces trying and failing to re-establish connection. Petty Officer Garza was standing next to the main rack with his hands at his sides and the expression of a man who had been told not to touch anything and was finding that instruction difficult to follow, while watching a critical system fail in real time. He was maybe 26, stocky, with the focused frustration of someone technically capable being held back by protocol. He looked at Emma when she came in. You're the IT contractor? Harper. What happened? Everything was fine until about 1,500. Then the Tier 2 switch started dropping packets intermittently first on the primary data VLAN, then the secondary. By 1,530, it was cycling restarts every 90 seconds. She was already at the rack, pulling the front panel off the switch chassis. The indicator lights told her most of what she needed to know before she even got her laptop connected. Link lights on 4 ports were amber negotiating, but not establishing. The management port was solid green, which meant she could still reach the device's operating system. Connected her console cable and opened the terminal. "What's running on the ops package?" she asked without looking up. Garza and Kowalski exchanged a look. "You don't need to know that," Kowalski said. He wasn't being hostile, it was a reflex answer, the kind that came automatically when someone asked about operational content. "I need to know the traffic pattern, volume, timing, whether it's streaming or burst. I'm not asking what the mission is." Another exchanged look. "Real-time ISR feed," Garza said. "Continuous stream. High bandwidth." She ran a command. The switch's error log populated her screen a long cascade of entries, each one time-stamped, each one describing the same failure mode, buffer overflow on the uplink port, occurring every 90 to 110 seconds with clockwork regularity. "Somebody changed the QoS configuration," she said. "What?" "Quality of service. The priority rules that tell the switch how to handle different traffic types. Someone modified the configuration on this switch. She'd scrolled to the change log. 1,423 hours today. The ISR feed traffic is now being treated as low priority. Every time the buffer fills up, it's dropping your ISR packets first." The room was quiet. "Who has access to change that configuration?" Kowalski asked. "On this switch?" "Me. And whoever holds the master admin credentials for the facility network." She was already typing, pulling up the authentication log. The change was made using the master admin account. "You?" She looked up at him. "My contractor account." "Not the master admin account. 2 different credential sets." She turned the laptop so he could see the screen. The master admin account logged in at 1,421, made the configuration change. Logged out at 1,424. "My contractor account," she scrolled, "hasn't touched this switch since I replaced it 3 weeks ago." Kowalski looked at the screen. "Who has the master admin credentials?" "Facilities Network Security Officer, and whoever he shared them with." She turned back to the terminal. "Can fix the configuration in about 4 minutes. Storing the original QoS rules. Your ISR feed comes back. No data loss beyond what's already dropped. Do it." She did it in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The link lights went green. On the monitor stations, the error screens cleared and the operational feeds came back. She didn't look at the content, kept her eyes on her terminal, watching the traffic counters climb back to normal throughput. "Feed stable," Garza said from across the room. He was watching the monitors. "Buffer's clear. We're good." Emma saved the corrected configuration to the switch's startup file so a power cycle wouldn't revert it, disconnected her console cable, and closed the rack panel. She stood up. "I'm going to need to write this up," she said. "Configuration change, the authentication log, the timeline. That's an incident report." "Yeah," Kowalski said. He was still looking at the screen where she'd shown him the admin account log. "Yeah, it is." She was at her desk in the network rack room 40 minutes later, halfway through the incident report, when the door opened and Cole walked in. He didn't have a coffee this time. He sat down across from her, without being invited, and without the careful social management of their earlier conversations. He looked tired. Not physically, operationally tired, the look of someone who had been running multiple problems in parallel for too long. "You fixed the comms room," he said. "Yes." Garza said the configuration had been changed. "Deliberately. That's what the logs show." "By who?" "I don't know. The master admin account. That's not my credential set." She kept typing. "Whoever has access to that account, or whoever got access to it." Cole was quiet. She could feel him deciding something. "There's an operation running tonight," he said. "That ISR feed minus. I don't need to know. It's not classified. Not the fact that it's happening." He shifted in his chair. If that feed had stayed down another hour, we would have had to scrub it. There are assets in position. Real people. She stopped typing. Someone knew that, he said. Someone knew the timing. She looked at him. Are you telling me this because you want me to do something with it? Or because you needed to say it out loud? Almost smiled. It didn't quite make it. I don't know yet, he said. Then let me finish my incident report. She turned back to her screen. Because that's the documented record of what happened to that switch today, and I want it filed before someone decides that record should look different. Cole stood. Harper. She kept typing. The man in the gray jacket. Do you know who he is? She paused. One beat. No. His name is Caldwell. He works for an office that doesn't advertise itself. Cole's voice was careful now, precise, in a way that told her he was giving her information he'd decided she needed. He's been at this facility for a week. Officially, he's here observing Iron Horizon. That's not why he's here. She kept her face on the screen. Why is he here? That I genuinely don't know. Cole moved toward the door. But he watched you shoot for 3 days, and then your access got pulled 20 minutes after he talked to you. Draw your own conclusions. The door closed behind him. She sat for a moment. Then she finished the incident report, saved it, and emailed it simultaneously to the facility, IT security mailbox, the base network operations officer, and her own personal email address. Belt and suspenders. Her grandfather's expression for redundant backup planning. You document everything, Emma. If it matters, you write it down. If it might matter, you write it down. If someone later tells you it didn't happen, you have proof it did. She left the building at 1830 and drove to the gas station outside the East Gate because her truck was low on fuel and because she needed the 10 minutes of ordinary activity to decompress. She filled the tank, went inside, bought a bottle of water and a pack of crackers that she didn't particularly want, but that gave her a reason to stand in a lit public space for a few minutes and think. The incident report was filed. The network was restored. Whatever operation was running tonight had its ISR feedback. She'd go home, sleep, come back tomorrow and do her job. Instead, she sat in her truck in the gas station parking lot and thought about Caldwell. Program glass door. 2 words on a card with a phone number. She'd been offered things before, or adjacently offered conversions that circled around offers without landing on them. Twice in her mid-20s, after competitions she'd done under her own name on the civilian circuit, she'd gotten calls from people who identified themselves vaguely and asked questions about her background and her grandfather and whether she'd ever considered serving. She'd been polite. She'd declined. She'd hung up and gone back to her life. She'd had reasons, good ones, or she'd thought they were good. Her grandfather had served 30 years and come home quieter each time, and finally came home for the last time and spent the rest of his life in that cabin with his rifles and his books and his silence. And she had loved him completely, and she had understood, viscerally and early, what the service had cost him. She had chosen a different life. Except that she'd spent 20 years training for a skill she never used in the field, and she'd taken a contractor job at a naval warfare facility, and she'd signed up for a military marksmanship competition, and she'd fixed their network at 9 o'clock at night. She thought about that, about what it meant that her version of a different life had ended up looking like this. Started the truck and drove home. The next morning, she arrived at the facility at 630 instead of her usual 730 because she wanted to get to the network monitoring terminal before the day watch came on, and because she wanted to pull the full authentication logs from the previous day before anything could be archived or modified. She had her coffee. She had her logbook. She had the careful, methodical focus that her grandfather had built into her over 2 decades of mornings exactly like this. What she didn't have was any expectation of what she found. The authentication logs for the master admin account showed 3 additional access events that she hadn't seen in her incident report pull the night before, because those events had occurred on a different network segment. One she hadn't checked because it was outside the immediate scope of the comms room failure. The master admin account had accessed the personnel records server at 1418. 5 minutes before, the switch configuration was changed. Stared at the screen. Personnel records. She navigated to the access log for that server. The master admin account had accessed 3 records in a 4-minute window. The log showed the record IDs, but not the names. Names were stored in an encrypted field she didn't have the key for. She wrote down the record ID numbers in her logbook. Then she pulled up the facility directory and cross-referenced the record ID format against the public personnel roster. Record IDs in this system were assigned sequentially at the time of facility registration. She could narrow the range by registration date. 2 of the 3 records were in a numerical range that corresponded to personnel who had registered at the facility more than 3 years ago. Couldn't narrow it further without the encryption key. The 3rd record was in a range that corresponded to personnel registered in the last 14 months. Stared at that number. Her own record would be in that range. She'd registered 11 months ago. She couldn't tell if the 3rd record was hers. But the math said it probably was. Someone had looked up her personnel record 5 minutes before sabotaging the network that supported an active operation. She sat with that for a long time. The monitoring terminal hummed. The rack room was cold. Outside the narrow window near the ceiling, she could hear the base coming alive, vehicles, voices, the distant sound of a helicopter spooling up somewhere on the flight line. She picked up her phone. She looked at Caldwell's card. She put the card back in her pocket. Then she picked up her personal phone, not the work phone, her personal one, the one that ran through a commercial carrier and had nothing to do with the facility network. And she called a number she hadn't dialed in 4 years. It rang twice. Voss Harlan. It's Emma. A pause. The old Master Chief's voice came back careful, the way it always got when he understood a call wasn't routine. Emma, you all right? I'm fine. I need to ask you something about my grandfather. Go ahead. Did he ever mention something called Program Glassdoor? A longer pause. Where did you hear that name? Harlan's voice had changed. Not alarmed, Harlan Voss didn't alarm easily, but focused. The way a man focuses when something he thought was settled turns out not to be. Someone handed me a card. What kind of someone? The kind with no name on their card. Civilian clothes. Was at this facility for a week watching me shoot. Harlan was quiet for long enough that she checked the call hadn't dropped. Your grandfather, Harlan said, finally, knew about that program. Knew about it from the inside. Another pause. Emma, I think you need to have this conversation in person. You can come Saturday. Come Friday, Harlan said. Come tomorrow. She looked at the logbook in front of her. The record ID numbers she'd written down. Harlan, is there something I should know right now? Before tomorrow? Quiet again. Ghost didn't retire, Harlan said. He was removed. There's a difference. His voice was measured each word, placed carefully, the way he'd describe a mechanical process to someone learning it for the first time. And the people who removed him didn't do it because he wasn't capable. They did it because he found something he wasn't supposed to find. The rack room felt smaller suddenly. What did he find? Come tomorrow, Harlan said. And Emma, don't use the facility network for anything personal between now and then. Not your email. Not anything. The call ended. She sat in the cold room with the phone in her hand and the hum of the servers around her and thought about her grandfather in his basement, surrounded by range cards and logbooks, and a silence she'd always interpreted as peace. She was starting to think it hadn't been peace. She was starting to think it had been vigilance. By 900, the facility had shifted into its normal operational rhythm. And Emma had shifted with it, moving through her maintenance rounds with the same invisible competence that had defined 11 months of days' sexes. here. She patched a firmware update on 2 access point controllers in the Western Annex. She ran a cable diagnostic on the VoIP system in the administrative wing. She responded to a ticket about a printer in the legal office that turned out to be a paper jam that the requesting petty officer could have fixed himself. She did all of it the way she always did, quietly, thoroughly, without requiring recognition. But the day felt different under the surface. She was moving through the operations corridor at 1100 when she heard her name. Not called to her, spoken about her. The door to one of the planning rooms was slightly ajar, and the voices inside were not making any effort to be quiet because they had no reason to believe anyone was in the corridor. She slowed down. Can't just sit on it. If she found the authentication anomaly, she's going to keep pulling. She filed the incident report. That's all. That's not all. Kowalski said she was asking about the master admin account. She knows it wasn't routine, so we bring her in. Caldwell said Caldwell doesn't make the call here. This is a facility security matter. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone used our SMAT admin credentials to access personnel records and then tank the ops network on a night when... Your voice down. A silence. The question, the first voice said, quieter now, is whether Harper is a coincidence or whether she's connected. Connected to what? To whoever pulled those records. She had stopped moving. She was standing in the corridor outside the door with her laptop bag and her toolbox, and her breathing was controlled, and her face was neutral because she had been trained since childhood to keep her face neutral when her brain was running very fast. Connected to whoever pulled those records. They thought she might be involved. She made herself start walking again. Normal pace. Normal footstep weight. She passed the door without looking at it and continued down the corridor and turned the corner and kept going until she was far enough away that stopping again made sense. And then she stopped. And she stood next to a water fountain and thought, someone had used facility credentials to access personnel records and sabotage the operations network. She had found the sabotage and fixed it and filed a report documenting what she'd found. And now at least 2 people in a planning room were discussing whether she might be the one who'd done it. She needed to understand what her grandfather had found. She needed to talk to Harlan Voss, and she was becoming increasingly certain that she needed to do both of those things before whoever was nervous in that planning room decided that pulling her access had been insufficient. Her phone buzzed, work phone, a new ticket. She looked at it. Ticket was filed under the name of Admiral Morrison's administrative office. Priority, routine. Description, network assessment, requested for flag spaces. Second floor, Admiral's corridor. Please coordinate directly with Admiral's aide, Lieutenant Commander Walsh. Routine priority. Filed at 1057. She thought about that. Then she thought about the timing. Morrison in the observation tower. Morrison watching her. Morrison standing next to Caldwell. A routine network assessment request from the Admiral's office, filed the morning after she'd shot a perfect score at 1,000 yards, fixed a sabotaged ops network, and been handed a card with no name on it. She typed a response, accepting the ticket and requesting a coordination time. The reply came back in 4 minutes, 1,400 today. Admiral's corridor, second floor. Lieutenant Commander Walsh will meet you at the security desk. She pocketed the phone. Whatever was happening, the sabotaged switch, the personnel records access, the voices in the planning room, Caldwell and his card, Harlan's voice going careful on the phone, it was converging. She could feel it the way she felt a wind shift before the flags moved. Something was already in motion. The only question was whether she was being brought into it or set up to take the fall for it. Picked up her toolbox and walked to the elevator. At 1,400, she would find out which. The elevator was slow, as always. She rode it to the ground floor, walked to the break room, poured coffee she didn't want into a cup she'd left there 2 days ago, and stood at the window that looked out over the motor pool while she thought about what she'd heard through that planning room door, connected to whoever pulled those records. The logic of it was almost elegant. Someone inside the facility had used master admin credentials to access personnel records and then sabotage an active operations network. Emma had found the sabotage, fixed it, and filed a documented report identifying the exact method and timeline. And now 2 people in a planning room were discussing whether that made her a suspect or a coincidence. It was the kind of trap that worked, because it was self-reinforcing. The more she dug, the more she looked like she was covering her tracks. The more she stayed quiet, the more it looked like she was waiting for something. She drank the coffee. It was bad. She drank it anyway. The thing she kept coming back to was the personnel records access. Not the switch configuration, that was the operational move, the piece that had an immediate effect. The records access had happened first, 5 minutes earlier. It had been the first thing whoever it was had done when they logged into the master admin account. They hadn't gone to the network first. They'd gone to the personnel files, which meant the records were the point. The network sabotage might have been secondary cover, distraction, or something opportunistic layered on top of whatever they'd actually come for. She finished the coffee, put the cup in the break room sink, went back to work. Lieutenant Commander Walsh was a compact, efficient woman in her late 30s who met Emma at the second-floor security desk at exactly 1,400 and did not waste any time on pleasantries. She had the energy of someone managing 12 things simultaneously and had allocated a specific portion of her attention to this and intended to complete it on schedule. Harper, thanks for coming up. The Admiral wants a full assessment of the network infrastructure in the flag spaces, the secure data lines, the communication redundancies, and the physical cabling in the conference suite. She was already moving, badging through the security door and holding it for Emma. We had some concerns after yesterday's incident in the comms room. What specifically is the Admiral concerned about? Integrity of the flag network segment, whether it's isolated from whatever happened to the Tier 2 switch. Emma followed her through the door. The flag corridor was different from the rest of the building, quieter, carpeted, the particular stillness of spaces where senior people made decisions that mattered. Photographs on the walls, citations, the accumulated visual weight of institutional authority. The flag segment runs on a separate VLAN, Emma said. It's logically isolated from Tier 2. But if someone had master admin access to the core routing infrastructure, logical isolation has limits. Walsh glanced at her, meaning someone with full admin rights could bridge VLANs. It's not the default configuration. It would require deliberate action, but it's possible. She kept her voice matter of fact. Technical briefing, not alarm. I'd want to check the core router's VLAN configuration to confirm the isolation is still intact. That's what the Admiral wants to know. They reached the end of the corridor. Walsh knocked twice on a heavy door, opened it, and stood aside. Emma walked in. The conference suite was large by facility standards, a long table, 8 chairs, a wall of monitors currently showing geographic displays she didn't examine closely. The room smelled like recycled air and old coffee. Admiral Morrison was standing at the far end of the table. He was taller than he'd looked from a distance. Late 50s, silver hair cut close, the kind of physical presence that didn't come from size, but from how a person occupied space. He was looking at one of the geographic displays when she came in, and he turned without hurry. Caldwell was seated at the table. Gray jacket, the same neutral face. There was a third person Emma didn't recognize, a woman, maybe 45, in civilian clothes with the particular posture of someone who was very good at being underestimated. Short hair, quiet eyes that moved over Emma once and then settled. Emma noted all of this in the time it took her to cross half the room. Miss Harper. Morrison gestured to a chair. Sit down, please. She sat, set her laptop bag on the table, but didn't open it. Her hands easy. I understand you're here to assess the flag network, she said. I am, Morrison said, and I'd like to talk with you about something else as well, if you're willing. I'm a contractor, Admiral. I work on your network. It's my willing. Something shifted in his expression, not offense. More like the slight recalibration of a man who had expected a different response and found the actual response was more interesting. Fair enough. He sat down. Tell me what you found yesterday in the comms room, she told him. Clean and factual, the same way she'd written the incident report. The QoS modification, the authentication log, the timing, the master admin account. She watched his face while she talked. It gave away very little the practiced attention of someone who had learned to receive bad information without broadcasting a reaction. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The personnel records access, he said. You found that this morning? Psh, yes, it's not in your incident report. I found it after I filed the report. I was going to file an addendum. Were you? The third person, the woman she didn't know, spoke for the first time. Her voice was even unhurried. Ms. Harper. The 3 personnel records accessed through the master admin account yesterday. Do you know whose they were? The log showed record IDs. Could narrow the range by registration date, but I couldn't pull the names. I don't have the encryption key for the name fields. We do. The woman looked at Morrison, then back at Emma. One was yours. One was Chief Briggs. The third was Lieutenant Cole. Emma sat with that. Briggs and Cole herself. Why those 3? She asked. That, Caldwell said, speaking for the first time, is the correct question. He set something on the table. A manila folder, thin, nothing written on the outside. Pushed it toward her. She didn't touch it yet. What's in that? Partial answer, Caldwell said. The part we can show you right now. She looked at Morrison. He nodded once. She opened the folder. Inside were 3 printed pages. The first was a network access log. She recognized facility infrastructure, similar to what she'd been pulling herself, but from a longer time window. 6 weeks. Someone had been making irregular, low-frequency accesses to the facility network from an external IP address using credentials that should have been retired 18 months ago. The second page was a personnel transfer document. She read the name at the top, Commander David Holt, former facility network security officer, retired 14 months ago. Holt, the officer who would have held the master admin credentials before they were supposed to be rotated to his replacement. Credentials were never rotated, Emma said. No, Caldwell said. They weren't. Who was supposed to do that? The transition was managed internally. There was a gap. The rotation was logged as completed, but the actual credential change never went through. His voice was still even. We identified the gap 6 weeks ago when we first noticed the external access pattern. She looked at the third page. It was shorter than the others. A single table, timestamps, and event codes. She recognized the format. Network intrusion detection log. Something had triggered an automated alert 3 times in the past 6. Each time from the same external source. Each time accessing the same segment of the facility network. Personnel records, operation schedules, and once 6 weeks ago, the flag network VLAN configuration. Someone's been mapping the facility, she said. Yes. And yesterday was not reconnaissance anymore. No, Morrison said. Yesterday was an operation. She closed the folder, set it back on the table. Why are you showing me this? The room was quiet. The geographic displays on the wall cycled silently through their feeds. Caldwell leaned forward slightly, because you found it first, before our own security apparatus flagged yesterday's activity. You identified the anomaly, diagnosed the mechanism, and documented it in under 40 minutes. He paused. And because your personnel record was one of the 3 accessed, which tells us that whoever is running this operation knows you're here, knows what you can do, and considered you significant enough to look at. Or, she said, whoever is running it wanted to make it look like those 3 records were the target when the real target was something else in the same access window. Silence. The woman she didn't know looked at her with something that might have been approval. We considered that, Caldwell said. And we don't know yet. Emma sat back in her chair. She was aware that she was in a room with people who held considerably more authority than she did, that she was being given information that implied obligation, and that the folder on the table was an opening move in a conversation that had a specific destination they hadn't told her about yet. Her grandfather had described situations like this once. Not this situation exactly, but the shape of it. The way institutional power brought you into a room and gave you partial information and waited to see what you did with it. They're not briefing you, he'd said. They're testing you. The briefing comes after. Admiral, she said, what do you actually need from me? Morrison looked at her for a long moment. The individual running this operation is inside this facility, he said. We believe they've been here for at least 3 months. We have a range of suspects based on access and opportunity, but we haven't been able to narrow it. Yesterday's activity gave us a tighter window. But the authentication trail was routed through a VPN chain that's going to take time to trace. He laced his fingers on the table. You understand this network better than anyone currently assigned here. You know the physical infrastructure, the logical configuration, the behavioral baselines of the traffic patterns. You've been watching it for 11 months. You want me to help identify them. I want to know if you've seen anything anomalous in 11 months of routine monitoring. Anything that didn't fit. She thought about that. She had a logbook. She kept notes on network anomalies the way her grandfather had kept notes on range conditions, not because she was required to, but because it was how her brain worked. Document everything. Trust the record. I need to pull my maintenance logs, she said. Take the time you need. She spent the rest of the afternoon in the network rack room, with her logbooks spread across the work surface and her monitoring terminal pulling historical traffic data. Walsh had extended her system access to cover the broader network history, and Emma worked through it with the same methodical patience she brought to everything. The thing about network anomalies was that they were easy to miss individually and obvious in aggregate. One irregular authentication event was noise. 5 irregular authentication events at 2-week intervals, each occurring between 200 and 400 on a weekend, each lasting less than 4 minutes, each accessing a slightly different segment of the network that was a pattern. She found 6 events in her 11 months of logs that she'd noted as unusual and then closed without explanation because they'd resolved on their own and hadn't affected service. She looked at them together now and felt something solidify in her understanding. Pulled the dates, cross-referenced them against the facility operations calendar, which she had access to through her network management role, because the calendar affected network traffic patterns. Training exercises, personnel movements, equipment rotations. Each of the 6 anomalous events had occurred within 48 hours of a significant personnel movement at the facility. A team rotating out, a new element rotating in. The kind of transition periods when people were busy, attention was distributed, and a 4-minute network access at 300 was least likely to be noticed. She wrote down the pattern, looked at it. Then she looked at what the 6 events had in common in terms of network segment, which servers, which data stores, which portions of the routing infrastructure had been touched each time. Personnel records, twice. Operations scheduling 3 times. And once 8 months ago, on a Sunday morning at 317, the facility security camera archive. She stopped. The security camera archive. She pulled up the access log for that segment. The event 8 months ago was there a 4-minute window, master admin credentials, the same external IP chain as the others. The access had touched the archive management interface, but she hadn't been able to tell at the time whether anything had actually been pulled or modified. She ran a deeper query. The archive management interface had 3 functions: playback, export, and deletion. 8 months ago, at 317 on a Sunday morning, the master admin account had used the deletion function. She looked at the timestamp range of what had been deleted. 47 minutes of footage. From a camera she had to look up by ID number. She looked it up. Camera 14 Echo, East Parking Lot, Lot C. The lot where contractors parked. 47 minutes of footage from the East parking lot, deleted 8 months ago. She sat back. 8 months ago. 3 months after she'd arrived. Someone had deleted footage from the parking lot where she parked every day. She thought about what you'd see in that footage. Her truck. Her arriving and leaving. Possibly her loading and unloading equipment. Possibly her making phone calls in her vehicle when she didn't want to use the facility network. Possibly someone else's vehicle, parked near hers. A meeting she hadn't known was a meeting. She had no way to recover the deleted footage. That window was gone, but she had the record that it had been deleted. And she had the camera ID, and she could pull the footage from adjacent cameras that might have captured the edges of that parking lot from different angles from the same time window. She started pulling. She was still at it at 1900 when the rack room opened and Briggs came in. He looked at her setup, the logbooks, the multiple terminal windows, the focused stillness of her posture, and didn't say anything for a moment. Walsh said you were still up here. I found something. She didn't look up. I need another hour. He pulled a chair over, uninvited, and sat down where he could see her screen. She let him. Whatever territorial instinct might have argued against it was outweighed by the practical reality that Briggs had been one of the 3 accessed records, which meant he had a stake in what she was finding. Camera footage, he said, reading the terminal. East parking lot. Months ago. Someone deleted 47 minutes from camera 14 Echo. Briggs was quiet. I'm trying to reconstruct a partial view from adjacent cameras. Different angles, different coverage zones. It won't be complete, but I might get enough to identify vehicles. Vehicles. Whatever was in that parking lot during those 47 minutes was worth deleting. I want to know what it was. Briggs leaned forward, looking at the adjacent camera feeds she was pulling. His elbows went to his knees. The posture of a man thinking hard. 8 months ago, he said. He stopped. What? He was quiet for another moment. There was an incident. Months ago. One of our operators reported a possible surveillance contact outside the east gate. Civilian vehicle, parked for an extended period, left when he approached. He filed a report. The report went to base security, got logged as inconclusive, and that was the end of it. Which operator? Briggs looked at her. Cole, he said. She stopped typing. Cole had reported a possible surveillance contact. 8 months ago. The same night someone deleted parking lot footage that might have shown that vehicle, or shown something else entirely. Did Cole's report include a description of the vehicle? I'd have to pull it. Can you pull it right now? Briggs took out his phone, made a call, had a short conversation she only half-heard, waited. The person on the other end came back with something, and she watched Briggs's face change not dramatically, but in the controlled way of someone receiving information that lands harder than expected. He ended the call. Dark blue sedan, he said. Civilian plates. Virginia registration. Cole couldn't get a full plate number. Virginia. There's a Navy support office in Arlington. Briggs said it carefully. Routinely handles administrative matters for naval programs that don't want a lot of institutional footprint. She looked at him. Caldwell, she said. I don't know that, but you're thinking it. Briggs said nothing. She turned back to the terminal. The adjacent camera footage was loading grainy, low resolution, the compressed artifact quality of long-term archive storage. Camera 12 Delta, south approach to Lot C. It covered the entrance lane and the first 3 rows. She scrubbed to the window corresponding to the deleted footage. The footage was dark, 300 parking lot, minimal lighting. She enhanced contrast, pulled the brightness. Shapes resolved. Parked vehicles, a light pole, the edge of the building. And there, in the second row, a vehicle she didn't recognize. But beside it, in the third row, a vehicle she did. She leaned forward. Her truck, her 2009 Tacoma, parked in its usual spot. She'd been here, at 300 on that Sunday morning. She pulled up her own access logs. Todd had an overnight maintenance window that weekend, a firmware update that had required her to be on site. She'd left around 430, which meant she'd been in the building while someone was in the parking lot outside. She had no memory of seeing anything unusual when she'd left. But the enhanced image showed something she hadn't expected. In the second row, the unidentified vehicle, there was a figure. Standing outside the vehicle, looking toward the building. She enhanced further. The resolution was fighting her. The figure was indistinct height, build, clothing, nothing definitive. But the figure was holding something. She stared at the screen. Long, narrow, held at a specific angle she recognized in her body before her brain caught up with it. Camera with a long lens. Someone had been in that parking lot at 300 on a Sunday morning with a long lens camera pointed at the building. Photographing what came out. Photographing who? Her phone buzzed. Work phone. The text was from Walsh. Admiral requests your presence. Conference suite now. She looked at Briggs. Go, he said. He was already reaching for her logbook. I'll hold this. The conference suite was different from 2 hours ago. More people, 6 now, where there had been 4 before. 2 she didn't recognize, both in uniform, both with the particular posture of people who had just arrived and were still calibrating the situation. Walsh was at the wall display, which now showed a network diagram she recognized as the facility's core routing infrastructure, with several nodes highlighted in red. Morrison was standing. That was different. He'd been seated before. Standing meant something had changed. Close the door, he said when she came in. Closed it. Sit down. She sat. 20 minutes ago, Morrison said, our network intrusion detection system flagged an active access event. Same external source as before. Different target. He gestured to the wall display. They're in the operational scheduling system right now. Not looking at it, writing to it. She understood immediately. They're modifying the ops schedule. Trying to. We have a team in the field. Active tasking. The schedule modification would recall them, abort the mission, pull them back. The recall comes through the official system. It looks legitimate. Team would comply, without knowing it wasn't real. Yes. She was already opening her laptop. Can you block it? Morrison asked. I can try to isolate the session. If I can identify the specific connection, I can terminate it from the network side. But if they're using the master admin credentials, they'll have elevated privileges. It becomes a race. How long? I don't know. 2 minutes. Maybe less. She was pulling up the network management console. I need to see the active session list for the scheduling server. Walsh brought her the server address. She was in the management console in 40 seconds. The elevated access Walsh had given her earlier was still live. So, active session list showed 11 connections. 10 were internal, recognizable by their originating IP addresses. The 11th was from an internal IP she didn't recognize. She looked closer. The internal IP was in a range assigned to the facility wireless network. Someone was on the base. Not external, not remote. They're here, she said, on the facility wireless. They're physically here. The room absorbed that. Can you locate the device? Morrison asked. Not precisely. The wireless controller can give me the access point they're connected to. That'll give me a building and a floor. She was already navigating. Give me 30 seconds. She found the wireless controller, pulled the association table, matched the MAC address of the 11th session to its access point. Access point 7 Foxtrot. Third floor, West Wing, Operations Section. Third floor, West Wing, she said. Morrison turned to one of the uniformed men she didn't know. A look passed between them. Go, Morrison said. The man left. Other unknown uniform followed. The door closed behind them. Emma was still in the management console. The 11th session was still active. She could see the data transfer rights to the scheduling server, the modification in progress. I can terminate the session, she said, right now. It'll drop their connection and roll back any incomplete write. But if they notice the drop, they'll know we found them. Do it, Morrison said. She terminated the session. The transfer stopped. The 11th connection dropped from the list. 10 sessions, all internal, all legitimate. She sat back. The room was very quiet. Then Walsh's radio crackled. A voice clipped, flat, the compressed urgency of someone transmitting while moving. Third floor west. We have eyes on a subject. Male, civilian clothes, laptop. He's running. Morrison picked up a radio from the table. Do not lose him. Copy. He's heading for the stairwell. Burst of static. Stairwell door is locked. He's a pause. Sound of movement. Subject is contained. We have him. Morrison's lowered the radio. The room held its breath for 3 seconds. Then the voice came back. Identity confirmed. It's Garza. Emma felt the name land in the room like something physical. She watched the faces around the table. Morrison, Walsh, Caldwell, the unknown woman, and she saw on each of them a version of the same expression. Not surprise exactly, the particular look of a thing suspected being confirmed. Garza, the comms tech, the man who'd been standing in the secure communications room last night with his hands at his sides, watching the monitors cycle through error screens, telling her he'd been instructed not to touch anything. The man who had called the help desk ticket that brought her to that room. The man who, she now understood, had known exactly what was wrong with the switch because he was the one who had broken it. Who had filed the ticket, not because he needed her expertise, but because having her fix it, having her find the authentication anomaly served a purpose she still didn't fully understand. Called the ticket, she said. Caldwell nodded slowly. Yes, he wanted me to find it. We believe so. She looked at the wall display, at the highlighted network nodes, the red-flagged access points, the diagram of a system she'd built and maintained and understood more deeply than anyone in this room. Why? She asked. If he was the one running the operation, why would he want it documented? Why would he want me in that room pulling the authentication logs? The room was quiet. It was the unknown woman who answered. Because, she said, the operation was never about the network. Emma looked at her. The network was the noise, the woman continued. ISR feed, the scheduling system, the credentials, the footage deletion. All of it was noise. She leaned forward slightly. The operation was about you, Ms. Harper. Specifically about creating a documented record of your unusual access patterns, your technical capability, your knowledge of facility infrastructure. A record that, in the wrong hands, looks like the profile of an insider threat. The words settled. Emma thought about the planning room conversation she'd overheard that morning. Question is whether Harper is a coincidence or whether she's connected. Thought about her personnel record being one of the 3 accessed. Thought about the long lens camera in the parking lot 8 months ago. Someone had been building a case against her. Not to report her. Own her. They wanted leverage, she said. The woman nodded. A documented pattern of anomalous network behavior. An IT contractor with unusual access, unusual skills, a background connection to a former program that some people in this building still consider sensitive. She glanced at Caldwell. The kind of profile you could take to someone and say, cooperate, or we show people what this looks like. Program glass door, Emma said. Silence. Morrison looked at Caldwell. A look that carried history she wasn't privy to. Your grandfather, Morrison said carefully, was part of that program's foundational architecture. When he was removed, he took with him a level of operational knowledge that certain parties have been trying to reconstruct for 22 years. He stopped, chose his next words. You are not him, but you carry his name, his training, and, apparently, his instincts. That makes you valuable to people who should not have access to valuable things. She sat with the weight of that. The geographic displays cycled on the wall. Outside the sealed room, the facility continued its ordinary evening vehicles. Footsteps, the distant mechanical sounds of a military installation, doing what military installations did. She thought about her grandfather in his basement, his silence, his vigilance. She thought about 22 years. What happened to him, she asked. What did he actually find? Morrison looked at her for a long moment. He pulled out a chair and sat down. That, he said, is going to take some time to explain. And I think you've earned the explanation. He looked at Caldwell, then back at her. First, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Go ahead. The card Caldwell gave you. Program glass door. Before any of this happened, before yesterday, before the comms room, before tonight, were you going to call that number? She thought about sitting in her truck in the gas station, parking lot. About Harlan's voice on the phone going careful. About the cold desert night and her grandfather's rifle in its case. About 20 years of training for something she'd never let herself name. I don't know, she said. Morrison nodded slowly. Like that was the honest answer he'd expected, and the one he trusted most. Fair enough, he said, and he started talking. Morrison talked for 40 minutes without interruption. He talked the way senior officers talked, when they'd decided to tell the truth, not the managed version, not the institutional summary, but the actual thing underneath carefully, with pauses in the right places, and with the particular weight of a man who had been carrying information for a long time and was finally setting it down somewhere it belonged. Emma listened. She didn't take notes. She didn't need to. She had her grandfather's memory, trained into her the same way his trigger technique had been trained through repetition until it became reflex. The story Morrison told went back 22 years. Program Glassdoor had been established in the mid-90s as a joint naval intelligence and special operations initiative, a small, deliberately obscure program designed to develop and maintain a cadre of personnel with exceptional precision, capabilities, and technical intelligence skills. Not snipers in the conventional sense, something more specific. People who could operate in environments where overt military presence was impossible, who could gather, assess, and act on intelligence with minimal institutional footprint. Ghost Harper had been one of the program's original members, not just a participant and architect. He'd helped design the training framework, the selection criteria, the operational protocols. His name was on the foundational documents. For 9 years, the program had functioned the way it was designed to function. Small, quiet, effective. Then Ghost had found something. He was reviewing operational records as part of a program audit, Morrison said. Standard accountability process, and he found a discrepancy. A series of operations that had been logged as completed successful outcomes, assets recovered, objectives met that he had personal knowledge had not happened the way the records described. He'd been on those operations, Emma said. Some of them. Others he knew through personnel he trusted. The records had been altered. Not slothfully, carefully, professionally, by someone who understood how the documentation system worked. Morrison's voice was level. Altered records had two effects. First, they concealed the actual outcomes of several operations outcomes that were, to put it plainly, failures that cost lives. Second, they provided a paper justification for budget allocations that went to Glassdoor, but were never used for Glassdoor. She understood immediately. Someone was pulling funding through the program. Significant amount of funding. Over 6 years, he folded his hands on the table. Ghost identified the discrepancy, documented it, and brought it to his commanding officer, who was, as it turned out, one of the people responsible. The room was very quiet. He was removed within a month, Morrison continued. Medical separation, a shoulder injury he'd sustained 2 years earlier that had been managed and was not operationally limiting. It was reframed as disqualifying. His record was annotated in ways that made the separation look routine. The program documentation was scrubbed. His foundational contributions were attributed to others or simply removed. Morrison looked at her directly. And the people who'd been running the financial operation continued running it for another 6 years before an unrelated IG investigation stumbled close enough to it that they shut it down themselves. Emma sat very still, 22 years. Her grandfather had known all of this for 22 years. She thought about the basement, the logbooks, the silence. She thought about a man who had come home for the last time and organized his remaining years around a rifle and a set of notes and a granddaughter he'd spent 2 decades training to be capable of something he couldn't name out loud. He knew they'd come back, she said. It wasn't a question. He believed the financial network hadn't been fully dismantled, that the people involved had restructured around the IG investigation and continued operating through other channels. Morrison paused. He was right. We've been tracking residual elements for 3 years. Garza was a recruited asset, not military, not intelligence. Technical contractor placed at this facility 14 months ago, specifically to develop leverage against personnel connected to the original Glassdoor program. Connected through me, she said. Through your name. Your presence here. The fact that Ghost Harper's granddaughter was working 11 months in a naval warfare facility as a network contractor represented to the people Garza was working for, an opportunity, either to develop leverage over you specifically or to use the documented association to cast doubt on anything connected to Glassdoor if it became inconvenient. She looked at Caldwell. And you've been here for a week watching me shoot, she said. That's not a coincidence either. Caldwell accepted that without flinching. We've been aware of you for longer than a week. The Iron Horizon competition was, as the Admiral mentioned, partly a talent identification exercise. But we were also watching to see what the other side would do, whether your presence at the competition would trigger a response. It did, yes, faster than we anticipated. She felt something move through her, not quite anger, not quite the cold fuel of the previous night. Something more complicated. The feeling of having been a piece on a board she hadn't known existed, moved by people on both sides of a line she hadn't known, was drawn. She let herself feel it for 3 seconds. Then she set it aside. Garza, she said. What does he know? We're in the process of finding out. Caldwell's voice was neutral. He's not talking yet. That's normal for the first few hours. He called the ticket that brought me to the comms room. He wanted me to find the authentication anomaly and start pulling logs. She thought through it. He wanted me documented as the person who identified the breach. If that log trail got in front of the wrong people, it would look like I'd found it because I'd done it. Or, the unknown woman said, he was burning the operation, deliberately creating a documented record that could be used either way as a frame for you, or as an exit if things went sideways for him. Covering himself. People in his position usually are. Emma looked at Morrison, the field team, the one that would have received the false recall order. Are they safe? They're safe. The schedule modification didn't complete. Your termination of the session caught it mid-right. The scheduling server rejected the incomplete entry and flagged it as a corrupted record rather than a legitimate order. He paused. You bought them about 4 hours they would not otherwise have had. She nodded. She didn't feel relief exactly. More like the flat, functional satisfaction of a problem that had been solved before it became a disaster. Her grandfather had described that feeling once not as heroism, not as victory, as arithmetic. You did the calculation correctly, and the outcome held. What happens now? She asked. Morrison looked at Caldwell. then at the unknown woman, then back at her. That depends, he said, partly on you. They gave her an hour. Walsh showed her to a small office, 2 doors, down from the conference suite, a spare room with a desk and a window that looked out over the flight line. Someone had put a cup of coffee on the desk. She didn't know who. She drank it without tasting it and sat at the desk and thought. The offer, as Morrison had laid it out in the last 10 minutes of their conversation, was straightforward in its structure and complicated in everything else. Program Glassdoor was being rebuilt. Not the original program. That architecture was 20 years old, and the threat environment had changed enough that a direct reconstruction wasn't operationally relevant. The foundational concept, small, technically sophisticated, difficult to attribute. Program needed people who could do things that conventional military and intelligence assets couldn't. They needed someone who understood network infrastructure at a level that allowed real-time manipulation in hostile environments. Someone who could identify anomalies in complex systems under pressure. Someone who could, if the situation required it, put a round on a target at distances that made conventional tactical options irrelevant. They needed, in other words, someone who was Emma Harper. Morrison had not oversold it. He'd given her the operational reality, what the work would look like, what it would require, what she'd be giving up, and what she'd be walking into. He'd told her the program's current staffing was thin and its was being rebuilt from scratch after 3 years of investigation into what the original program's corruption had actually touched. He'd also told her she could say no. This is not a recruitment where no is a problem, he'd said. You walk out of here tonight, you go back to your network rack room tomorrow, and none of this conversation leaves this room. Your incident report stands. Your performance at Iron Horizon stands. Nothing changes. She'd looked at him. Except she'd said that I know what I know. Yes, he'd said. Except that. She sat in the spare office now and thought about her grandfather. Not about what he would want for her. She'd spent years resisting that framing because Ghost Harper had been careful never to push, never to recruit her toward anything, never to make his legacy feel like an obligation. He'd trained her because she'd wanted to be trained. He'd taught her everything he knew because she'd asked and kept asking. The choice had always been explicitly hers, but she thought about what he'd found and what it had cost him. About a man who'd done the right thing and been methodically dismantled for it. About 22 years of sitting in a basement, surrounded by the documentation of something he could never prove to anyone who had the authority to act on it. He'd kept the records, all of them. She'd inherited them, boxes of logbooks and printed documentation that she'd moved to the cabin's basement after he died and never fully gone through, because going through them felt like an ending she wasn't ready for. She was starting to understand that he hadn't left those records for himself. He'd left them for her, for this, for whenever this conversation happened, with whoever had the authority to receive what he'd spent 22 years preserving. She looked at the flight line through the window. A helicopter was spooling up at the far end night training, probably, or a mission launch. The sound came through the glass as a distant, purposeful vibration. She thought about the field team. 4 hours, Morrison had said. Her termination of Garza's session had bought them 4 hours they wouldn't otherwise have had. Real people, real stakes. The arithmetic she hadn't known she was doing had mattered for actual human beings in an actual field somewhere. Stood up, finished the coffee, left the cup on the desk. Walked back to the conference suite and knocked. Come in, Morrison said. She came in. She sat down. I have conditions, she said. The next 4 hours were the most sustained negotiation she had ever conducted, and she was conducting it with an admiral, a man who worked for an office that didn't advertise itself, and a woman whose name she still didn't know. She'd learned the woman's name in the first 10 minutes of the negotiation. Diane Reyes. No relation to the SF sergeant from the competition. She'd checked the face and confirmed the disconnect. Diane Reyes held a position in the Naval Inspector General's office that had a title 3 lines long and meant, as far as Emma could determine, that she was the person responsible for making sure that what had happened to Glassdoor the first time didn't happen again. Emma's conditions were 5. First, her grandfather's records. The boxes in the cabin basement. She wanted them formally received, documented, and incorporated into the active investigation into the original Glassdoor corruption. Not filed, not archived. Used. Morrison looked at Caldwell. Caldwell nodded. Agreed, Morrison said. Second, the annotated separation record. Ghost Harper's military file had been deliberately degraded to make his removal look routine and his concerns look like the complaints of a difficult officer. She wanted that record corrected. Not expunged, corrected. The truth of what he'd found and what had been done to him needed to be in the official record, even if it was classified. That's not my authority alone, Morrison said. Then get the authority. Pause. Longer than the first. I'll pursue it, he said. Can't promise a timeline. I can work with that. But it's not optional. It's a condition. Diane Reyes was writing something. Emma noticed that and noted it. Third, her incident report from the previous night stood unmodified. No administrative revision, no reframing, no quiet burial in a classified annex where it would never be seen. The documented record of what Garza had done to the facility network existed as she'd written it. That's already the case, Walsh said from the side of the room where she'd been quietly managing the administrative threads of the evening. I want it in writing. Walsh looked at Morrison. Morrison nodded. Fourth, if she agreed to participate in the rebuilt program, the terms of that participation were documented and supervised by the IG office. Not by program leadership alone. External oversight with teeth. Diane Reyes looked up from her writing. That condition, she said, I can authorize myself. Emma looked at her. Then we have 4 out of 5, Emma said. What's the 5th? Morrison asked. She'd thought about the 5th condition for the entire hour she'd spent in the spare office. It was the one that didn't have a bureaucratic solution. The one she couldn't make someone sign their name to. Briggs and Cole, she said. They're on whatever list Garza was building. Their records got accessed. They've been surveilled. I want that documented, and I want them told. Morrison frowned slightly. Telling them opens, I know what it opens. Tell them anyway. She held his gaze. If this program is going to be rebuilt on different terms than the last one, it starts with not keeping secrets from the people who are in the blast radius of someone else's operation. She paused. My grandfather found out what was happening to him by accident, 2 years after it started. That's 2 years he couldn't protect himself. Don't do that to Briggs and Cole. The room was quiet. Morrison sat back. All right, he said. It was past midnight when the conference suite finally emptied. Caldwell left first, with a quiet word to Morrison that Emma didn't hear. Diane Reyes collected her notes and gave Emma a direct look on her way out that communicated something Emma interpreted as cautious respect. Walsh stayed behind to manage paperwork, and Morrison stayed to sign things, and Emma sat at the table until there was nothing left that required her presence. She was gathering her laptop bag when Morrison said, "One more thing." She stopped. He reached into the briefcase he'd had at his feet for the last 2 hours and pulled out an envelope. Standard manila, sealed, with nothing written on the outside. He held it out. She looked at it for a moment before taking it. This came through our office 3 months ago, Morrison said. From a law firm in Albuquerque. Your grandfather's estate executor. He'd left instructions that it be held until he paused until certain conditions were met. What conditions? The letter makes that clear. He held it out further. He wrote it 6 years ago. She took the envelope. It was lightweight. 1 page, maybe 2 at the most. Stood there holding it and felt the particular vertigo of receiving something from a person who'd been dead for 3 years, the way the dead could keep making arguments, keep insisting on things. Keep loving you in the specific and practical way of someone who'd planned ahead. Take your time, Morrison said. She sat back down. Opened the envelope. The paper is standard letter size. Her grandfather's handwriting in blue ink. The tight and deliberate script she'd grown up, watching Phil logbook pages and range in the margins of technical manuals. Emma, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I spent a long time hoping would happen, and an equal amount of time fearing. I wanted to be there for it. I'm sorry I'm not. I'm not going to explain everything in this letter, because there are things I couldn't put in writing and things you'll need to learn from people who can answer your questions directly. What I want to tell you is simpler. I made a choice 22 years ago to document what I found and bring it forward through proper channels. That choice cost me everything I'd built professionally. For a long time, I thought it had been the wrong choice, not morally, but practically, strategically. I thought I'd sacrificed my position and accomplished nothing. I was wrong about that. The documentation survived. You're the reason it survived. You kept those boxes without knowing what was in them, and that mattered. The training I gave you was never about the rifle. The rifle was a method. What I was actually teaching you was how to see clearly under pressure, how to calculate without panicking, how to wait for the right moment and act decisively when it came. You can do that. You've always been able to do that. The rifle just made it visible. What you do with this is your decision. I mean that without qualification. You don't owe anyone anything, not me, not the Navy, not the program. If you walk away from whatever room you're in when you read this, that is a completely legitimate choice, and I will have no argument with you from wherever I am. But I want you to know something. You are better at this than I ever was. Not the shooting, though, that too. The thinking, the patience, the ability to hold complexity without losing the thread. I spent 22 years hoping someone would get it right. I think you might be the person who does. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. That's not conditional. It never was. She read it twice, folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope. Morrison was at the far end of the table, giving her the privacy of his attention, being elsewhere, looking at the wall display that was now dark. She sat for a moment with the envelope in her hands. Then she stood up. Admiral. He turned. The records in the cabin basement, she said. I can have them here by Friday. He nodded. I'll have someone meet you. Don't send Caldwell. She picked up her laptop bag. Send Diane Reyes. He almost smiled. I'll pass that along. She walked to the door, Harper. She turned. Morrison was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a clean category for. Something between gravity and something more personal. The look of a man who had been in rooms like this for 30 years and still found that some conversations landed differently than others. Your grandfather was one of the best officers I ever knew, he said. I was a lieutenant commander when the separation happened. I didn't have the rank to fight it. I've spent a long time wishing I'd found another way. She looked at him. He didn't blame the people who couldn't fight it, she said. He blamed the people who should have and didn't. She held his gaze. There's a difference. She walked out. Corridor was empty. The facility had gone to its night operation, minimum skeleton crew, low lighting in the administrative sections, the distant hum of equipment that never fully slept. She walked the length of the east corridor and took the stairs down and pushed through the ground floor door into the night air. It was cold, clear, stars overhead, the same stars she'd watched from the gas station parking lot the previous evening, the same stars that had been above her grandfather's cabin every training morning for 20 years. She stood on the steps for a moment. She thought about Briggs's face when she'd told him what she'd found in the camera archive. Thought about Cole's voice when he'd said, "You've been on this base for 11 months, and nobody knew." Thought about Cutler on the range line, going still when she'd said her grandfather's name. She thought about Garza, sitting in whatever room they'd put him in, working through his calculation of how much to give up, and when. She thought about her grandfather at 38 years old, the age he'd been when it happened sitting across a table from someone in a uniform, and understanding that the institution he'd served his entire adult life was choosing to discard him rather than clean its own house. She thought about what it had cost him to keep the records anyway, but keep training her anyway, to write that letter and have it held by a law firm in Albuquerque for 6 years, because he knew, somehow, that the thread would eventually find its way back. Her truck was in Lot C. She walked to it, put her laptop bag in the passenger seat, put Caldwell's card and the letter in the glove compartment, sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine for a while. Phone buzzed. Personal phone. She looked at the screen. Harlan Voss. Text message. You still coming Friday? Typed back. Make it Saturday. I have something to bring you. 3 dots. Then the boxes? Yeah. A long pause. He told me you'd know when it was time. She set the phone on the passenger seat. Started the truck. The drive home was quiet and dark and took the same 90 minutes it always took. She drove the state roads north into the scrubland. Windows cracked, the cold air moving through the cab. She didn't turn on the radio. She thought about the letter, about the last line. I think you might be the person who does. She hadn't decided anything yet. She knew that. The conditions she'd laid out in the conference suite were a framework, not a commitment, the negotiated terms of a decision that still hadn't been made. But she'd asked for the conditions because some part of her understood that the decision had already been made, at some level below the one where she was still arguing about it. Made not tonight, not at Iron Horizon, not in the parking lot with Caldwell's card in her hand. Made a long time ago, in a basement under a cabin in the high desert. In the cold mornings before dawn. In 20 years of training for something her grandfather had never given a name, but had never stopped preparing her for. She turned off the paved road onto the dirt track. Her truck moved through the dark on familiar ground. Cabin appeared in the headlights, weathered wood, the porch, the satellite dish at its adjusted angle. Parked and killed the engine and sat in the quiet. She'd go inside. Sleep, drive to the facility tomorrow. Do her job. And on Saturday, she'd load the boxes from the basement, into the truck bed and drive south and hand them to Diane Reyes. And whatever had been waiting in those boxes for 22 years would finally go where it was supposed to go. She got out of the truck. The desert night was completely still. The kind of still that felt like it was paying attention. She went inside. She slept 4 hours and woke before the alarm. Cabin was cold, the way it always was in the early morning, the kind of cold that settled into the walls overnight and didn't lift until the sun had been up for 2 hours. She made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, watching the sky go from black to the particular deep blue that came just before dawn, and thought about the boxes in the basement. She'd known they were there since the week after the funeral. The estate executor, a quiet man from Albuquerque, who'd driven up personally rather than sending a courier, which she'd appreciated, had told her that Ghost had left specific instructions about the basement materials. Them intact. Don't sort them. Discard anything. And wait. She'd assumed wait meant until she was ready to go through them emotionally. She understood now that it had meant something more specific. She finished the coffee, put on her jacket, went downstairs. The basement smelled the same as always. She stood in the doorway for a moment, hand on the light switch, letting the familiarity of the space settle over her before she turned on the work lights. The boxes were on the metal shelving unit along the north wall, 6 of them, banker's boxes. The lids taped shut with the kind of careful, deliberate taping that said someone had sealed them, knowing they wouldn't be reopened for a long time. Her grandfather's handwriting on the side of each one. Dates. Subject codes she hadn't tried to decode. She pulled the first box off the shelf, set it on the bench, looked at it. Then she pushed it back and left it sealed. She'd made a commitment to deliver them to Diane Reyes intact. Opening them now, alone in the middle of the night, that wasn't the right way. That felt like the kind of thing she'd do to satisfy her own impatience and would regret. Her grandfather had kept these sealed for 22 years. Could wait until Saturday. She went back upstairs, set her alarm for 5:30, and slept the remaining hours without dreaming. Thursday at the facility was strange in the way that days are strange when everything looks the same and nothing is. She drove through the east gate. The guard looked at her face and said, "Good morning," which was new. She badged through the security door. The building smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee, same as always. Her network monitoring terminal was running its usual overnight reports. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, except that Garza's workstation in the comms section was empty. Someone had taken his equipment laptop, personal items, everything, and what remained was just the furniture and the silence of a space that had recently been vacated under circumstances nobody was discussing openly. Word traveled the way it always did. By 900, the story going around was that Garza had been removed for a security violation. Nobody had specifics. Specifics didn't make it far in an environment where people understood that some things weren't for general circulation. Emma heard the version Kowalski was telling in the corridor outside the equipment bay at 930, a version that was vague about the nature of the violation and careful not to name anyone else involved, and she registered it and moved on. She had 3 maintenance tickets. She worked through them in the same order. She always worked through tickets highest impact first. Administrative items last. A routing issue on the West Wing wireless, which turned out to be a misconfigured access point someone had reset without restoring the correct channel settings. A firmware update on 2 switches in the motor pool communications rack that had been pending for 2 weeks. And the printer in the legal office, which was acting up again, which turned out to be a driver conflict that she resolved in 11 minutes, in which the requesting petty officer thanked her for as though she'd performed minor surgery. Lunch on the concrete barrier near the east parking lot. The rifle range was quiet today, no scheduled range time for Bravo troop until next week. Target frames stood empty in the afternoon distance. She ate her sandwich and looked at the 300-yard line and thought about the first morning of Iron Horizon, about the particular quality of the silence that had fallen on the range line Cutler announced her score. She thought about what it had meant and what it hadn't meant. Footsteps on the asphalt behind her. She turned. Briggs. He sat down on the barrier a few feet away without being invited, which was his standard operating procedure, and looked out at the range. "Morrison talked to me this morning," he said. "And Cole?" "Cole, too, separately." Briggs was quiet for a moment. "About the personnel records. About what Garza was building." She didn't say anything. "Cole took it hard," Briggs said. "Not the surveillance part, the part about your grandfather." He paused. He didn't know the full history. Most people who know Ghost Harper's name know the legend. They don't know what happened to him afterward. Most people weren't supposed to. "Yeah." Briggs picked up a small piece of gravel from the barrier, turned it over in his fingers. "For what it's worth, what you did Wednesday night. Finding it, fixing it, the incident report. The field team made it back this morning." "Mission complete." She nodded. "You probably already knew that." Morrison mentioned it. Briggs set the gravel down. "Dang." He said it like it was a simple question about her contractor schedule. But it wasn't, and they both knew it. "For now," she said, "my ticket queue doesn't clear itself." He almost smiled. "Almost." "Good," he said. Stood. Looked at the empty range one more time. "For what it's worth, I've been around shooters my whole career. I've trained with the best people this country has. What you did at Iron Horizon," he stopped, started again. "That was something different. That was somebody who actually knows what they're doing." It was the most direct thing he'd ever said to her. She looked at him. "My grandfather would have said the rifle does most of the work." "Your grandfather," Briggs said. "Sounds like he was a humble man." "He was a complicated man," she said. "But yeah, some of the time." Briggs nodded once and walked back toward the operations building. She finished her sandwich. Cole found her at 1,600, which she'd expecting since Briggs mentioned he'd been told. He came into the network rack room, which was becoming something of a destination for people who needed to have conversations they didn't want to have, the open corridor. She was at her terminal running the end-of-day monitoring checks. He sat down across from her, the same chair as before. He did not have a coffee this time either. "Morrison told me about your grandfather," he said. "I know. I didn't know. Any of it. What he found. What they did to him." He was looking at his hands. "I've quoted that man in professional development contexts. Used his name as an example, and had no idea what the institution did to him. Most people didn't. That's not a comfort." She stopped typing and looked at him. Cole's face had the particular quality of someone working through something moral in real time, not performing it, actually doing it. She'd misjudged him early on. She was willing to admit that, at least to herself. "You filed a surveillance report 8 months ago," she said. "The blue sedan outside the east gate." He looked up. "You didn't just let it go. You documented it." She held his gaze. That mattered. The report made it into the investigation. It helped establish Garza's timeline. He was quiet for a moment. "I thought I was being paranoid," he said. "The duty officer treated it like I was being paranoid." "You weren't." "No," he exhaled. "No, I wasn't." He straightened in the chair. "The motor pool conversation. When I told you to reconsider the competition. I remember it. I was not wrong about the competition being intense, but I was wrong about you." He said it straight, not performing the admission. "I made a judgment based on nothing. That's not how I want to operate." She looked at him for a moment. "You also told me about Caldwell," she said. "When you didn't have to. You gave me information that turned out to be important." She paused. "So, not wrong about everything." Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, more like the slight release of a tension he'd been holding. "For whatever it's worth," he said, "everyone on Bravo knows your score. The full 3-day combined. It's been written on the whiteboard in the ready room." She blinked. "Why?" "Because Reyes asked if he could put it up. Said he wanted people to see what the ceiling actually looked like." Cole stood. "He's a serious competitor. He doesn't do that for just anyone." She didn't know what to do with that, exactly. Filed it. Cole moved toward the door. "Harper." He stopped. "The field team that made it back this morning," she said. "Are they good?" He turned. "Yeah, they're good." He paused. "All 4 of them." She nodded. He left. She sat for a moment in the humming quiet of the rack room. Then she turned back to her terminal and finished the monitoring checks. Saturday morning, she loaded the 6 boxes into the bed of her truck, tied them down under the canvas tarp, and drove south. Diane Reyes met her in the parking lot of a government building 40 miles from the facility, a nondescript structure in a commercial district, the kind of building designed not to attract attention. 2 other people were there who Emma didn't recognize and wasn't introduced to, which was fine. They had equipment cases and wore the careful, deliberate movements of people, accustomed to handling materials that mattered. They transferred the boxes from Emma's truck to a vehicle that Emma assumed was government-owned but had no markings suggesting as much. Diane Reyes signed a chain of custody form and handed Emma a copy. "This goes into the active investigation file today," Reyes said. "Not tomorrow. Today." "I know." I wanted to say it out loud. Reyes looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention that Emma had come to associate with her. "Your grandfather put a significant amount of effort into preserving this material. That's going to matter. Will it be enough?" Reyes was quiet for a moment. "Enough to close the financial investigation?" "Yes." "Enough to fully reconstruct what happened to his record?" She paused. "That's more complicated. The people who made those decisions are mostly retired or dead. Institutional accountability for things that happened 22 years ago." She stopped. "It's a long process. I want to be honest with you about that." He waited 22 years, Emma said. I can wait for the process. Reyes nodded. The record correction, Emma said. Morrison's condition. I pushed it up the chain Thursday morning. There are 2 signatures required above Morrison's level. I expect to have both within 30 days. Reyes met her eyes. Chief William Harper's separation will be reclassified as administratively motivated. His contributions to the glass door foundational architecture will be formally credited, and the annotations on his file will be removed. She said it like a commitment, not a prediction. That part I can promise. Emma stood in the parking lot with the morning sun, a class coming flat across the commercial buildings and the traffic moving on the road beyond the lot's perimeter. Canvas tarp was gone from her truck bed. The boxes were gone. 22 years of her grandfather's careful documentation were in a vehicle, heading somewhere they would finally be used. She felt the weight of it leaving. Not all of it. Some weight was permanent, the kind that becomes part of your structure rather than a burden you carry. But the acute weight, the thing she hadn't known she'd been holding until this moment, eased. Program, she said. Timeline. We're targeting a 6-month stand-up. Formal selection process, oversight framework in place, IG integration, as you requested. Reyes paused. You're not obligated to make a decision before that. I know. But if and when you do. Reyes reached into her jacket and handed Emma a card. An actual card this time, with a name on it. Diane Reyes. A direct number. An office address. You call me. Not Caldwell. Not Morrison. Me. Emma took the card. Why you? Because you asked for oversight with teeth, and I'm the teeth. Reyes said it without any particular emphasis. Just fact. And because your grandfather deserved someone in this institution who took it seriously. So do you. Emma pocketed the card. She drove north. She stopped at Harlan Voss's property on the way back. She hadn't planned to. She found herself turning onto the dirt road without having consciously decided to, and decided that was probably information. Harlan was on his porch with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who'd been expecting someone without knowing who. He watched her truck come up the road and park, and he stood when she got out. Climbed the porch steps. He handed her his coffee without a word. Took it. Drank. They stood together looking out at the flat desert property, at the cleared corridor through the scrub, at the rusted steel targets at the far end that had been standing there for decades. You delivered them, he said. Yes. How do you feel? She thought about that, honestly. Like something's been settled, she said. Not fixed. Settled. He nodded. He understood the distinction. She could see it in the way he accepted the answer without pressing it. He worried, Harlan said, about you. About whether he'd done right by you, training you the way he did, keeping you connected to something that had cost him so much. He looked out at the targets. He used to say he didn't know if he was preparing you for something or burdening you with something. He was never sure which. Both, she said. It was both. Yeah. Harlan's voice was quiet. That sounds right. She finished the coffee, handed the cup back. I'm going to say yes, she said. To the program. I haven't said it officially yet, but I'm going to. Harlan looked at her. You sure? No. She looked at the targets, but I think that's the honest answer. I'm not sure, and I'm going to do it anyway, which is probably how it's supposed to feel. Harlan was quiet for a moment. He said something once, the old Master Chief said, about the moment before a shot. When you've done everything right, the calculation, the position, the breathing, and you're at the point where the only thing left is to press the trigger. He said there's always a half second where you're not sure, where you want to check everything one more time. And the discipline isn't eliminating that doubt. It's accepting it and pressing anyway. She stood on the porch in the afternoon sun and felt the truth of that land, somewhere specific. Yeah, she said. That sounds like him. She drove home. 3 months later, Emma Harper submitted her resignation from her IT contractor position at Redstone Naval Warfare Facility on a Thursday morning. She filed the paperwork with the same methodical thoroughness she'd brought to every ticket, every incident report, every maintenance log for the past 14 months. The network rack room she left behind was organized, documented, and fully transitioned to her replacement, a young petty officer named Torres, who'd spent 2 weeks shadowing her, and who had, she noted, particular quality of attention that distinguished people who would eventually be genuinely good at something from people who would be merely adequate. She told him that directly on her last day, which visibly surprised him, and she meant it without sentimentality. She spent her last morning at the facility on an errand nobody had asked her to run. She went to the ready room. The whiteboard was there, along with the accumulated operational notes, schedule markers, and the usual abbreviated language of people who communicated in shorthand by necessity. And in the upper right corner, in someone's careful block printing, was a number she recognized. Her Iron Horizon combined score, 3-day total. Perfect. Below it, in smaller writing, E. Harper, contractor. She stood there looking at it for a moment. She didn't erase it. She left it there. The formal record correction for Chief Petty Officer William Ghost Harper came through in 26 days, 4 days ahead of Diane Reyes's estimate. Emma was in the cabin when Reyes called to tell her. She was in the basement not packing. The boxes were gone. Just sitting at the workbench in the space that smelled like her grandfather with the M24, with the M20 on its rack in front of her, because she'd wanted to be somewhere quiet and specific when the call came. "It's done," Reyes said. "Signed this morning." His record now accurately reflects his separation as administratively motivated. His contributions to the program are credited. The annotations are removed. Emma sat at the workbench. "Thank you," she said. "It took 22 years longer than it should have." "Yes." A pause. "He was right about you, you know," Reyes said. "Whatever he put in that letter. You read the letter?" "No. I just know he was right." A pause. "The program orientation starts March 3rd. If you're still, I'll be there," Emma said. She ended the call. Sat in the basement. She looked at the rifle on its rack for a long time. The stock her grandfather had rebedded twice. At the scope, he'd fitted himself. The 47,000 rounds of history in the metal and wood of it. She thought about what Harlan had said, about the half-second of doubt before the press, about the discipline being in accepting it and going anyway. She thought about her grandfather at 38, sitting across a table from a man in a uniform, understanding what was happening and choosing to document it anyway. Choosing to keep the records anyway. Choosing to keep the records anyway. For 20 years, granddaughter anyway. For something he couldn't name, but never stopped believing would matter. Stood up, took the rifle off the rack. She didn't clean it. It didn't need cleaning. She just held it for a moment, the weight of it familiar in her hands, in the way that only things practiced for decades become familiar. Not like holding a tool, like holding a conversation with someone who wasn't there anymore. Put it back on the rack, turned off the work light, went upstairs. March 3rd arrived cold and clear. She drove to a facility she'd been given coordinates for rather than an address, which told her something useful about what the next phase of her life was going to look like. The building was smaller than she'd expected. 6 vehicles in the lot. No signage. A door with a keypad that accepted the code she'd been given and opened into a corridor that smelled like fresh paint and industrial carpet, the particular smell of a space recently repurposed. Diane Reyes was inside. Caldwell was not, which Emma noted with quiet satisfaction. 2 other people she didn't know were in the room, both looking at her with the careful attention of people who'd been briefed and were now running their own assessment. She returned the attention without discomfort. A 4th person came in behind her. She turned. Reyes, the SF sergeant from Iron Horizon. He was in civilian clothes, same contained, quiet. She remembered from the competition, same still hands. He saw her and nodded once. She nodded back. "You're here too," she said. 7 out of 8, he said. "Not good enough, apparently." A pause. They told me who had the other point. My second string, third shot, she said. Wind shifted between my calculation and the shot break. I should have caught it earlier. He looked at her for a moment. Most people wouldn't have called that a mistake, he said. It was a mistake. She said it without apology. I know what a correct shot feels like. That one had half a correction I didn't account for. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone recalibrating. Reyes, he said. I know, I watched you shoot. She extended her hand. Harper. I know, he said. Everyone knows. They shook hands. Diane Reyes called the room to order. Emma found a seat and sat down. She felt the rightness of it settle into her without fanfare. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter and more durable than either. The feeling of a decision made correctly, arriving at the place it was always going to arrive, in the time it was always going to take. Her grandfather had spent 22 years in a basement preserving a record that people with authority had tried to erase. He'd done it alone, in silence, with no guarantee it would ever matter. He'd done it because it was the right thing, and because he was the only person positioned to do it, and those two facts had been sufficient. She understood that now, in a way she hadn't fully understood before. Not as a lesson, as a thing she carried in her body, the same way she carried the fundamentals he'd built into her over 2 decades of mornings. The briefing began. She opened her notebook. She listened. Outside the window, the morning was fully like the flat, clear, indifferent light of early spring. Kind of day that didn't care about the significance of what happened inside the buildings it illuminated. In fact, it just kept moving. She kept moving with it. Her grandfather had known she would. She was done proving he'd been right. She was just doing the work now. The people who are underestimated are not made stronger by being doubted. They were already strong. The doubt just delayed the moment everyone else found out.